Hi, welcome back to my channel. This is a different video for you today because we're going to talk about a trilogy of 3 books that are all the same story but from 3 different perspectives. Okay? The first book is The Girl with the Diary, which is Amelia's perspective with the aid of her granddaughter Emma, and I'll tell you about Emma in a moment. And then we have Annie's perspective in the second book, which is The Prison Child, and we have Charlie's perspective in the third book, which is The Soldier's Letters, I believe. I think it's The Soldier's Letters, and of course, yes, The Soldier's Letters. So let's talk about book number 1 first, which is The Girl with the Diary. Now, as the book begins, we meet Amelia and Emma. Okay, Amelia is a 92-year-old who lives on her own, but is visited and cared for in tandem by Emma, her daughter, Emma and her daughters, okay? Amelia's daughters and Emma. So Emma is the granddaughter. So it's Emma's turn to visit her grandmother, but it's not, it's a great relationship. Emma and Amelia are very, very close. During this visit, however, Amelia suffers a stroke and gets rushed to the hospital. As it turns out, it's her heart that is damaged. So a cardiologist comes into the picture, okay, Dr. Beck. Well, since Emma was with Amelia when she suffered the stroke, then of course she accompanies her to the hospital. And then Amelia's daughters come as well. But before Emma's mother and aunt come to the hospital, Amelia starts calling out for Charlie. Where's Charlie? Where's Charlie? Emma, go get my book. Go get my book. What book? So Emma goes to her grandmother's home and she looks, and then she finds a journal, an old leather journal. So she brings the book to the hospital, and her grandmother says, "This is between you and me." Okay, she doesn't want her daughters to know what she's going to reveal to her granddaughter Emma through the pages of that diary, of that book. Okay? Now, that is the setting, okay? But then we have to shift back to Amelia's past, okay? Amelia is a 17-year-old girl in Nazi-occupied Prague in 1942, okay? She's hiding in her closet in the SS break-in. Her mother is killed. Her brother Jacob and her father are taken, forced on a train, and then she ends up in, I hope I say this right, Theresienstadt, in that concentration camp. Now, the first thing I want to mention is I never heard of Theresienstadt, and I know there were multiple concentration camps at that time. So this book was this entire series was very educational, very edifying, very sad, very heartbreaking, but learning is just a lifelong thing for me anyway. So now she goes to this concentration camp, and there's a soldier that should be her enemy, okay? And his name ends up being Charlie. And he's anything but her enemy. Now, the thing about this concentration camp, and probably all of the concentration camps, is people were forced to work. Prisoners were forced to work. But only the strongest prisoners could work, and the other ones were either executed or gassed, which is executed. Okay? So Charlie was present when Amelia's mother was killed, and he takes an interest in Amelia, and he helps her, and she gets assigned a job. And the two steal off time here and there, not much, little snippets of time. And the fact that they're should be born enemies, they're anything but. They're very, very drawn to each other, and there's a chance that something good could happen between them. That is Amelia's story. But the whole time that this story is being played in past and present, Emma is reading this in the pages of a journal while Amelia is recovering from her stroke and surgery and all of that. And so you have two stories, I don't know why I put three fingers up. You have two stories being told because while Amelia is in this post-stroke stage and calling out for Charlie, then you have the fact that the grandmother needs surgery, and she says, okay, I'll have surgery under one condition. That is if you date my doctor, Dr. Beck. Who? Emma? Date the doctor? Well, there's a side story here. Emma had been involved with somebody named Mike for like 6 years, but he was a constant cheater, and she was splitting up from him, but yes, she's attracted to the doctor. Now the grandmother says, you have to date him if you want me to have the surgery. And I don't think I'm giving you a spoiler because this is a trilogy and there's a lot of stuff in this series. So she agrees to date him, and I wish I could tell you his first name, but of course, you know, me and names, we just don't gel. I'm always forgetting names. But it's important for me to mention that because he becomes a central character, not only as Amelia's cardiologist and surgeon, but also as the person that Emma develops a relationship with. So this is a heartbreaking story because of what happened to Amelia while she was in the concentration camp, what happened to her mother, her father, her brother Jacob, and whatever could have happened between her and Charlie. And that's all we're going to do on that first book. We're not going to talk about their end. We're not going to talk about their end because we have to talk about books 2 and 3. So if we go on to book 2, and that cover is going to come up right now. I do want to write the time down so I know when to edit it in. We have The Prison Child. Now, this I could have mentioned in the first review, but I want to try to keep them as separate as possible. We have Annie. Now, who's Annie? When Amelia was being taken to the Riesenstadt, the concentration camp, there was somebody on the train who was pregnant, and Amelia befriended her. She had a little baby named Lucy. Okay, Lucy somehow became born in those deplorable conditions in that concentration camp. That was in 1943. But this book takes place in 2 different time frames. It takes place mostly in the present, also in 1943, but a decade later when little Lucy, who is now called Annie, is 10 years old, and well, she's 12 actually, and she hears something that alludes to her past. Now, let's talk about this for a second. Remember Amelia, book 1? We just talked about her 2 minutes ago. Amelia is now married. Amelia is now the mother of the little girl born in the concentration camp. How and why? You'll have to read it to find out. The little girl that was born in the concentration camp named Lucy, she renamed her Annie. Annie has a sister named Emma. We met Emma in book 1. But this book that I'm talking about now, The Prison Child, takes place in those time frames that I'm talking about now. And now Annie is a little 12-year-old. She's got I think a 15-year-old sister. Emma was a year or two younger. Annie is older. Emma was younger. Okay. Now, Emma overhears her parents. Who were her parents? You're going to have to follow this to kind of figure that out. Who were her parents, and is everything she thought until the age of 12 a lie? So she gets a little older. She gets to about the age of 20. So the time frame shifts in this book, and she takes off and she travels to look for her past. So guess what? Remember book 1 that we talked about, where the grandmother Amelia told Emma that it's just between me and you? And she kept it a secret from her mother and her aunt, what she read in that journal, as we read the journal when we read book 1. Well, Annie, now in book 2, she starts to find out the secret of her birth in her life, in her early life, before she became Amelia's daughter. But she kept that secret. So Emma and the grandmother Amelia have a secret in book 1. Anna has a secret in book 2, and we find out how she learned about who she was and how she survived and how she carried on her life and how she was a loved little girl. Okay? She really was loved. Excellent. Just excellent book. That's all I'm going to tell you about Annie. So I'm going to write that down so I know when to add in the third book cover. And we're gonna segue into book 3, which is the Soldier's Letters. Now, I didn't mention this at all in talking about book 2, because I said that Amelia was married now, had two daughters, Emma and Annie. But remember in book 1, when Amelia was asking about Charlie and that haze after her stroke, when her memory was really acting weird? Well, who's Charlie? Well, this is where this series really stabbed me in the heart. Now, in the author's note or the preface at the very beginning of the book, Shari J. Ryan admits that this is a taboo book. And I could have said this in book 1, but I didn't want to, in talking about book 1, but I didn't want to mention it until now. Why did Shari J. Ryan, in the preface of this book, say that this was a taboo book? Because she wrote this book with Charlie, who we met in book 1, or we knew of Charlie in book 1. And yes, in book 2 as well. And he was I hate to use these quotes, but I have to. He was a good Nazi. And I have read maybe 1 or 2 other books where a Jewish concentration camp prisoner fell for a Nazi soldier. But I've never read a book like The Soldier's Letters by Shari J. Ryan. I have never read a book like this. Now, I'm going to reiterate that she said this was a taboo book. So she had to do a lot of research. So let's talk about Charlie. Now, Charlie starts off as a 10-year-old child whose parents, especially his mother, tell him that he's about to change schools. He's blonde and blue-eyed, and Hitler's army, or Hitler's, I meant to research this. I really did. But Hitler's young army, but that's not what it's called. I can't believe I didn't write. Well, I never write anything down anyway, but his young soldiers were all to be blonde and blue-eyed and looked exactly alike. And that's what young Charlie looked like. And he was going to go to the school. And he was going to be conditioned in this school. And this conditioning was to hate Jews and to become a killer and to serve in Hitler's army. Okay? Now, he's 17 or 18 years old, and now it's 1941. Nazi-occupied Prague. I said that already, right? In book 1. Well, in book 1, a young girl, a teen girl says, "Mama, don't leave me." Who was that young girl that said, "Mama, don't leave me"? That young girl was Amelia, who we met in the first book, who is now 92 years old, because this book takes place in multiple timelines. Charlie witnessed Amelia's mother being murdered by another Nazi soldier. Okay? Now, what does that mean? That means that now Charlie is a Nazi soldier. Well, we learned in book 1 that him and Amelia were very drawn to each other. But what I didn't say, because I held it off until now, is they fell in love. Okay? This was the Sadat concentration camp. I'm sorry, I'm not saying it correctly. And he fell in love with her, and her name was Amelia. And he did whatever he could to keep her as safe as possible under the deplorable conditions. And the one thing that Charlie did is he didn't give in to the theories and the ideology that Hitler was pressing on to his young army or his broad army. He never wanted to be a soldier. Okay? Now, meanwhile, in this book, we have his perspective. But I want to mention something. In the first book, remember, Amelia is 92 years old. So if we're reading Charlie's book, right? In 1941, he was a young man. But if he's still alive in present day, which he is because this is his story, he would also be in his 90s, 92, 93. Okay? Now, one thing we learned in book 1 is that Charlie and Amelia, although they fell in love, were never able to be together. Amelia married somebody else, and now she raised 2 daughters. But Charlie looked for her for 70 years. In book 1, when Amelia has her stroke, "Where's Charlie? I need Charlie." Then Emma, the granddaughter that we met in book 1, looked everywhere for Charlie. And guess what? She found Charlie. And she took Charlie to her grandmother, and the 2 were reunited in their 90s. Okay? But that's not the end of the story. We have Charlie's life that we consider in A Soldier's Letters. And our author did exceptional research to tell us about there were soldiers with good hearts, and Charlie was one of them. And we learn about his life during those years when he couldn't find Amelia, those 70 years. We learn about his loss of his father, his relationship with his best friend Claude, his relationship with his mother, and for when he finally found Amelia again. Excellent, excellent book. There was many points in this book that I was brought to tears, in this entire trilogy that I was brought to tears, but there was one specific spot in this book that just broke my heart. But the whole trilogy ends with a happy ending. So this whole series, I want to see if Booker calls it anything. Yeah, they say that for fans of the Tattooist of Auschwitz, The Choice, and Orphan Train will be absolutely gripped by this heart-wrenching World War II page-turner. It's a story of forbidden love and its power to survive the impossible. I wanted to read that because it does end on a happy note. And there you have it, this gorgeous trilogy. And so now I'm going to pop all 3 covers up at the same time. And they are, just to be repetitive enough, is The Girl with the Diary, The Prison Child, and The Soldier's Letters. Excellent, excellent trilogy. Historical fiction at its very best. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.